By 2014, other countries had started to develop their own robust means of speaking peer-to-peer on the internet. In the same way that the US lost much of its competitive advantage in TV and radio, the initial radio frequencies really were piped in around the world at the time when the US had a first mover advantage in TV programming, in radio programming. CI proprietaries like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Liberty dominated a lot of the international radio sphere because many countries didn't really have their own organic programming. So if you wanted to listen to the radio, you were basically automatically tuned in. But by 2014, other countries began to become very fluent in the internet. And things came to a head in 2014 when the US government overthrew the government of Ukraine. And we can debate this if you'd like. I would encourage you. It's probably not going to look good if you try to debate me on this, but I welcome you to attempt it. But the US government overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine in a classic color revolution where Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt piped in $5 billion worth of State Department, USAID, and National Endowment for Democracy money into Ukraine, into the groups that then toppled the Kiev government. And the US foreign policy establishment was not expecting the counter coup that happened, which was that the entire eastern side, half of the country broke apart. Declared itself a breakaway state, not subject to the new Kiev government, the new US installed government. There was no election. It was just installed. And then Crimea voted in a referendum to join the Russian Federation formally. And this threw a monkey wrench in a multi-decade plan by the US State Department and the UK Foreign Office. And the State Department and NATO were frustrated that despite pumping in so many billions of dollars to flood the zone with their own propaganda, to flood the zone with their own media talking points and media organizations, that they still had this remnant within eastern Ukraine and Crimea that the propaganda was not penetrating, no matter how much money they threw at it. They had a problem, which was that people were not accepting our propaganda, so we had to turn to a technique in order to tune down theirs. And this really became the origins of the institutionalization of the censorship industrial complex. This started off in 2014 immediately with something called the Gerasimov Doctrine, which is named after Russian General Valery Gerasimov. They quoted Gerasimov as saying that the nature of war has fundamentally changed. You don't need to win a military skirmish anymore. You can simply use social media in order to create a regime change in an election by swinging hearts and minds. And then that new leader will control the military and get the military to step down. And it's much less expensive to actually do a social media color revolution than it is to go head to head with warring armies. Now, 3 years later, after the damage was all done, Mark Galeotti, who coined this phrase, the Gerasimov Doctrine, would pen an oopsie in NATO's journal saying, I actually sort of misquoted him. Gerasimov was actually quoting the US. He was referring to what the US does. But by that point, the Gerasimov Doctrine had already changed names, and it came to be called hybrid warfare, which is this idea that conventional warfare is a thing of the past. We need to look at war as spanning from tanks to tweets. And NATO would formalize this doctrine beginning in 2018 with Jens Stoltenberg articulating this phrase, from tanks to tweets. That is, NATO's mandate would formally be, from 1949 until 1995, there was not a bullet fired by NATO, but they were always a conventional warfare alliance. But that they became a psychological warfare alliance after 2014, and they began setting down institutional roots across NATO. Now, this started in Central and Eastern Europe, spanning from Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the V4, Ukraine. And then in 2016, this would move westward to Western Europe and then into the United States. A few things about this. It was during this time in 2014, 2015, when a lot of the characters in this story really got their start. A lot of the characters that we know and love today, like Nina Jankowicz, for example, who was the head of the U.S. Disinformation Governance Board, which was a big scandal that ended up being really the first victory against government role in censorship in the U.S. Nina Jankowicz, has this sort of reputation as being, almost like a caricature of a silly theater girl, but she comes from this same web of NATO, sort of CIA cutout, State Department, UK Foreign Office intrigue. From 2015 to 2018, she was a part of something called the Integrity Initiative, which went down in flames when leaked documents revealed that it was a clandestine British intelligence operation in order to manipulate elections across Europe to stop the rise of right-wing populist parties. A lot of the entities that are major censorship mercenary groups today, like the Global Disinformation Index, who I believe Freddie and others have done great work on, have as their board actually an almost respawn of the Integrity Initiative, which got its start before the 2016 election, in 2015 through 2018. So in 2016, three things happened in rapid succession that spark off the expansion of this NATO seed from 2014, 2015. We lost the Philippines election when Duterte was elected. Brexit happened in June 2016. The U.S. election happens in November 2016. All of these elections were internet elections. That is, the popular press, the U.S.-funded independent media organizations in the territory, for example, were all strongly against what happened, but because of popularity on the internet, these things succeeded. And another thing that's interesting to note here is that the month after Brexit, in Warsaw, in July 2016, NATO formally updated its charter to add hybrid warfare as a capacity to financially build out. So in 2017 is really when the consensus building process for establishment of a whole society censorship consortium domestically all across NATO was playing out. And there were world tours of these disinformation conferences. There's something that I call the sort of Dirty Diplomats Roadshow, which was a phenomenon where exiles of the Hillary Clinton State Department, who all thought they were getting promotions to the White House National Security Council when Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election, they were all serendipitously fired when, unceremoniously fired when Donald Trump, the 90-10 underdog on Election Day, won the election. But they had a very special set of skills, which is that they were highly connected across the world, across governments, across parliaments in Europe in particular, because their specialty from 2014 to 2016 was doing a roadshow across Europe to get European countries to pass sanctions on Russia, that is, to cut off their own arm in order to spite Russia after Crimea. And so they already had this relationship, these State Department exiles, these diplomats, to negotiate and offer favors and do carrots and sticks diplomacy with European regulators in order to get them to pass sanctions on Russia. Well, they would, using Russiagate as their predicate and using disinformation as an attack on democracy as their predicate, and frankly using favors for favors as their predicate, they then ran back in 2017 that same sanctions roadshow that they did after Crimea, but this time for internet censorship. This would give rise to the early regulatory scheme in Europe around things like NetzDG in Germany, which folks may be familiar with, which ushered in the age of mandatory AI censorship. That is, that ended the chance that people had to evade censorship. Because before 2016, technologically, censors could not keep up with the amount of produced content online. And I'm going to get to the AI part of the history in a bit here. So 2018, you had this massive capacity building of soft power institutions for censorship work, and a retooling of free speech NGOs towards censorship. And this is something that I referred to sort of earlier, where you had organizations like Freedom House, or things like Jigsaw, which I'll sort of get to in the Jared Cohen part of this story, that were all sort of created and capacity built and given millions of dollars by the Pentagon or the State Department or USAID to do free speech diplomacy work. They were all given money to do counter misinformation, counter disinformation work.